So good afternoon and welcome to this hybrid event of the Council of Europe and the IEEE Standards Association, both to our audience here in Vilnius as well as our remote participants. Today it is a great pleasure to be launching the joint IEEE Council of Europe report on the Metaverse and its impact on human rights, the rule of law and democracy in the margins of the Council of Europe Digital Partnership, which we hope can contribute to discussions around the governance of the Metaverse. For that, we could not be launching the report in a better setting than the European Dialogue on Internet Governance. I'm Irene Kitsara from IEEE SA. I had the honor and pleasure to lead this publication, and I will be today's moderator. Online, I'm joined by the focal point of the Council of Europe for this publication and key partner throughout the process, EuroDIG, who will facilitate the online participation. So we will start in today's panel with a short introduction to today's topic, a presentation of the report's context by the two participating organizations, followed by a 50-minute discussion with our esteemed panelists, some of which are whom are here on site and some are online, who we thank for their participation today. During the discussion, I will also be sharing some of the key findings of the report, and you will have the opportunity to pose your questions during a Q&A session of 15 minutes. We will then conclude with some closing remarks. So I believe you have all certainly seen some forms of virtual worlds or immersive realities, either in VR gaming, for most if you happen to have teenage children, use of digital twins for simulations or VR teleconferencing. These are glimpses in what can form part of the metaverse. It is currently mostly linked to virtual reality or mixed reality or extended reality applications that use advanced sensors to create immersive experiences by optimizing and customizing content to create these experiences adapted to the user based on physiological and other measurements in an analysis of the user behavior and reaction. Did you know that in just 20 minutes of using a VR headset, there are roughly 2 million points of biometric data which are being collected? This enables the metaverse features, of course, on one side, and at the same time creates concerns about the impact we will be discussing today. The term of the metaverse was coined in 1992 in a fiction novel of Neil Stevenson, Snow Crash, to describe an immersive virtual world. Currently, there is no consensus about the definition of the metaverse, and the term is often used interchangeably with the terms immersive realities, extended virtual worlds across policy, media, and research papers. So if we were to imagine the metaverse as one single space, environment, or universe, virtual worlds and immersive realities could be viewed as components thereof, which we are already experiencing in some of the forms that were mentioned before, even if nowadays they're not fully immersive or interconnected. Virtual worlds and immersive realities, they exist for consumer or entertaining applications, such as VR social platforms, while the industrial applications of the metaverse are already available, for example, in the automotive industry and manufacturing. The metaverse comes with cross-cutting application across all industries and fields of life, from education to health and fitness, as well as enablers for political participation. Now, the common denominators across all definitions are the sense of presence in the metaverse, in a virtual environment you are plausibly considering as a reality, the immersiveness of the experience, persistence of this environment, the convergence or fusion of the physical world with the virtual spaces, with moving from one to the other one as a seamless experience. And lastly, the interconnectedness and interoperability across different worlds, with moving being from one to another being a seamless experience. These features are possible thanks to enabling technologies like AI, augmented, virtual, mixed, extended reality, blockchain, 5G, Internet of Things, which allow the technical implementation of the metaverse and its features. These technologies currently reflect the state of the art in the technology, but this may look different as technologies develop and emerge. Even if these enabling technologies are not the focus of the report, some issues arising in the metaverse context may be linked to these technologies. The metaverse has experienced times of heightened and decreased interest, similar to the AI winters and summers. Now that the attention is drawn to the disruption that generative AI is bringing, the metaverse remains a relevant topic to explore on its potential impact and governance to address existing harms taking place and to prevent further ones which may come from its deployment and scaling up. The work that has already started on related policy discussions and report, for example, at the European Union level, and also now with the Council of Europe, shows that this is indeed a topic of interest. Moreover, it's good to reflect on ways that this potential technology can be used also to promote the exercise of human rights, the rule of law and democracy, and developing human-based and responsible metaverse. Now, let us move to the two institutional partners, the Council of Europe and IEEE, who will put this cooperation in context and provide some first information about the report. We have with us Irena Guidikova, who is the head of Democratic Freedoms and Institutions Department from the Council of Europe, and Clara Neppel, Senior Director, Lead of the IEEE Vienna Global Office. Irena, you have the floor.
Thank you, Irene, or Irini. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this immersive journey. Well, it's not as immersive as it could have been. As you see, we're in a classic hybrid format, but maybe next meeting we will try to plan it and actually execute it, at least partly in the metaverse. I think it could be very exciting. I represent the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe, for many of you, hopefully, is a familiar organization. It's not the same as the European Union. It's an organization which was founded earlier than the European Union, and its mandate is about human rights, to be a watchdog for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The Council of Europe is an old organization, but it actually is quite an agile organization, so it keeps an eye very much on developments in society, including technological developments, because obviously they have a very strong impact on how societies evolve and on the preservation and protection of rights and of our democratic systems. And because of that, we also have a digital partnership with major technological organizations, but also standard setting and other organizations like IEEE. And we have joined forces to put together this report. You can pick up your copies later if you wish. It will also be available in digital copies online. To develop this report and map how the emerging metaverse is likely or is already affecting our fundamental rights and values. Now, the metaverse obviously is only a concept yet. I mean, it's not really fully fledged reality, let alone a parallel universe. It's evolving as we speak, but it's really important at this very early stage to actually try and anticipate and see how what is already happening there in this different virtual world has an impact on our real lives, and how we can make sure to prevent any wrongdoing harms that might be happening there. The aim is not to stifle technological development, that's clear. The Council of Europe has already certain instruments, international treaties and other standards, also soft standards, that concern technological developments, and it's never really been the goal or the impact of them to harm, to impede technological evolution. I can only quote the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, which will be presented. There will be a session later on about it, as well as the Data Protection Convention, which precedes, again, the GDPR. And indeed, the very recently adopted Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence. It was only adopted last May, and it will now, the process of ratifications will start. With all of these instruments, the Council of Europe just wants to make sure that that the advantages and opportunities that the digital environment creates realize themselves without any negative impacts on human rights. The Council of Europe started looking into the metaverse developments already in 2021 when we were preparing our next digital agenda. And at that time, the digital agenda said that we find the challenges that we already know about the internet multiplied in the metaverse, or in the potential of the metaverse. Now, the juries still are out to what extent the metaverse will really grow and develop. Maybe it will actually float, we don't know. We have some predictors here and futurists who might be able to tell us more, but it's really difficult to, at this time, to predict. But whatever is already out there, it clearly blurs the lines, as Irene said, between the virtual and the physical, and issues such as privacy, freedom of expression, data protection, violence, hate speech, discrimination, all of these things that happen that we know from the real world are actually also happening there. And what's problematic is that accountability, redress, law enforcement, the provision of justice are really difficult in that online universe, because we don't yet have the real rules that apply specifically to the metaverse, and we don't have the institutions that we have in real life, law enforcement, police, justice systems, to enforce, to investigate, and to render justice and redress in the digital world. So we have to navigate somehow between the two worlds and try to see what applies and when. And when we joined forces with IEEE, our goal was to see to what extent the existing standards and the existing instruments that exist internationally, but also in the countries, can protect the users of the metaverse. We haven't gone to the end of that work yet. We just started to actually map the challenges and the issues, and this is what we're going to talk about later. Now we are continuing by actually digging a little deeper to see to what extent the international regulations as well as the national laws can apply to specific actions, behaviors, activities in the metaverse, and whether we need additional guidance. I think it will be interesting to mention just a couple of other standards that the Council of Europe has. In addition to the AI Convention, the Convention on Cybercrime and Data Protection, we have standards on content moderation and censorship that apply to phenomena like disinformation or hate speech. And they provide very clear indications of how comprehensive approaches both regulation, co-regulation, and self-regulation can be put in place to prevent or to try and deal with these phenomena. Obviously, it's very difficult, and we are far from being successful enough. Cybersecurity and online harassment, digital literacy, the Council of Europe is also active in that area too, not just through its work in the field of freedom of expression in media, but also in education. And we have some projects that will have to be adapted for the metaverse. They haven't been designed for that purpose yet. And again, we have to catch up with many, many things. To conclude, it's early days, it's difficult to anticipate, but we can never be precautious enough. We really have to put the principle of safeguarding first, the rights, values, the users, and try to anticipate as much as possible and regulate and moderate and act as much as possible preventively, so that this place does not become lawless far west, but actually, becomes a place where all the opportunities can materialize and the harms are as limited as possible.
Thank you. So my name is Clara Neppel. I'm the head of IEEE Europe, and at least Rodica told me, Irena told me that she did not hear about IEEE before, so just a very few thoughts about and introduction of what IEEE is. We are the world's largest technical association, so we have 470,000 members worldwide, basically in every country in the world, and we cover from electrical engineering, which is in our name, to quantum, basically all fields of technology. I think what's interesting that this year we are also celebrating 140 years. So IEEE was founded at that time all by, among others, Edison, because at that time there was also a very new technology, electricity, which had a lot of promises, and a lot of people were afraid. And the IEEE we still have this tagline, advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. So just like electricity, which became basically basis of our lives, this is also how the metaverse can have the potential to advance technology, to advance humanity. But of course, we have to take care, just as we heard before, to make sure that human rights, democracy, rule of law, and safety are also taken into account. And one way of doing this is through standards. It's interesting, we heard about standards. I think when we discussed before is that law is actually the standardization of ethics. When we discuss in IEEE about standards, primarily think about technical standards. It's about Wi-Fi, for instance, that you're all using now. It's an IEEE standards that we are developing. So what is interesting now that, of course, these kind of standards which we develop for safety, interoperability, and so on, now also evolve. With such issues as a metaverse, we also have to take into account human rights, social dimensions. So it is absolutely essential that we also work with institutions like the Council of Europe and the OECD and other policymakers as well, and of course social scientists, in order to incorporate also all these thoughts in our standards and them to be part of let's say our communities, and we also participate in their initiatives. So we are also part of the Digital Partnership Program of the Council of Europe since 2018. Are also part of the Committee on Artificial Intelligence. So a lot of initiatives that we are already doing together. Now, when it comes to this report that I invite you also to read later on, so this was a collaboration basically where, again, we said we need each other. We need to know more about human rights and democracy and rule of law, and I think that the Council of Europe needs to know more about the technological basis of how the metaverse works. And so we gathered 50 experts worldwide, which brought their knowledge, technical knowledge, social knowledge, legal, and so on. And this is now basically a basis for discussion, as we heard before, to take into account all these issues. Some thoughts about, or some issues about the structure and scope of the report. So there is actually a short version of the report that is available online, which was already published last year. Which identify different issues which could arise that could create an enabling environment, or potentially pose risks to human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. And I'm just citing, so privacy and data protection, identity, safety and security, protection of children and other vulnerable groups, access, inclusion and non-discrimination, freedom of expression and censorship, labor, environment, actually that's a big issue also as well. The rule of law, so that means access to justice, digital territoriality, enforcement. And now this longer report includes also information about enabling technologies. You also have SWOT analysis and additional information. So with this, I think we are, and of course, some of the experts that are contributing are part of the panel. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you, Irena and Clara, and please allow me now to introduce you to the rest of the panelists, and I will start with the one that's sitting next to me, Nondas Christofilopoulos, who is the UNESCO Chair on Futures Research. He's an SER member and contributor to the report, as Clara mentioned. And moving to our report, to our remote panelists, we have three of our contributors, further contributors, who also happen to be leading IEEE volunteers in technical communities and standardization work. Melodina Stevens, who is Professor of Innovation and Technology Governance from the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. And she's also participating in the IEEE Industry Connection on the extended reality and the research group on issues on autonomy and AI in defense systems. We also have Ricardo Chavaraga, who is the head of the Confederation of Laboratories of AI Research in Europe, and he's head of the Switzerland office and chair of an IEEE IC group on neurotechnologies. and Monique Jean Moreau, who is a tech leader and chair of standardization projects, including recommended practice for ethical assessment of extended realities and a standard for ethically aligned design and operation of metaverse systems. Last but not least, we have Kumardev Chatterjee, who is a member of the Interpol expert group on the metaverse. Now we will move to the panel discussion, and which aims to address both benefits and challenges of the metaverse for human rights, the rule of law, and democracy. We will have 2 rounds of questions, and each panelist will have around 3 minutes per question. So let me start with Ricardo, followed by Melodina, and let me ask you, and the same question applies to the rest of the panelists, what are some key beneficial applications and issues you would identify from the deployment of the metaverse in relation to human rights, the rule of law, and democracy? And how is the metaverse different from other developments and technical iterations like the internet, digital environments, or social platforms? Ricardo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Irene, for the invitation, and to IEEE and the Council of Europe for allowing me to share some thoughts on the metaverse, its opportunities and challenges. And yeah, let me start by saying that the possibility of providing this immersive experience at a large scale, as the metaverse foresees, can be a game changer in multiple activities, such as training, coaching, therapy. So these are activities where right now we are somehow limited by the availability of service providers and geographical differences. The metaverse can then allow us to provide a very rich immersive experience where people can interact with their therapists, with their mentors, with their coaches in a very tight way, and therefore can be highly beneficial for activities in education, health-related activities, and so on and so forth. And one of the aspects that makes it incredibly interesting is that the access to these environments can come at a rather low technological cost. So these can be also a contributor for the democratization of certain services and practices, and can help into one of the current limitations that we have in modern technology, which is the lack of diversity. And in this particular aspect, I think metaverse have a lot to offer and can potentially be one of the major driving to giving access to a larger proportion of the global population to services that currently are highly restricted by the digital divide. When we look at how these systems are built and will be developed and evolved in the future, we also foresee multiple challenges. The first one comes from a technological perspective. The metaverse and these immersive realities will rely on the integration of multiple technologies, as it was mentioned before. Therefore, issues of interoperability or quality, standardization, and harmonization at the technological and legal aspects will provide a challenge when we try to scale this beyond a single jurisdiction. And how the policies will evolve in order to provide a sufficiently harmonized, but at the same time, a strong governance mechanism, it will be one of the key aspects to develop in the coming years, even before the metaverse reaches the scale that is expected to reach. And another aspect that is extremely important and extremely challenging when we think about how to develop responsibly and how to govern is that when we think about these technologies, we often focus on the display of a stimulation to their users. But we shouldn't forget that these are massive platforms for collecting data from behavior, from choices, from the movements of our eyes, our muscles, our body, and even potentially the activity of our brain. So when we think about what would be different with respect to the current platforms, we need to take into account what is the impact of having a specific platform provider access in a continuous and persistent manner to all this activity, all this data from their users, being able to choose what is provided to these users and to define what these users can choose by limiting the offer. So when we think about that, the current issues that have been identified with platforms such as social media, being the impact in mental health, be it the implication and manipulation of democratic processes, will just grow exponentially. And between these benefits and challenges is where we need to focus the discussions about governance. And I'm glad to hear also the thoughts of my colleagues here in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Melodina, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm going to talk about 3 issues and I'll try to cover them as quickly as possible. The first one is labor. So in the universal human rights, we have the right to work, and we also have the right not to be unemployed. Now, what we see is technically the metaverse economy could be as much as 13 trillion. At least that was the early estimates when Facebook rebranded itself to Meta. And this is feasible when you think of it contributing into a digital economy, which itself would be worth 45 trillion by 2030. But as my colleague mentioned, the heart of the metaverse is AI. And currently, right now, the scale of adoption, not just deployment, adoption is crazy. So in early 2022, only 150 people could concurrently be on the metaverse. By 2024, we're talking about 3,000, and city estimates 5 billion. That's about 60% of the world's population by 2030. So what about jobs? On one hand, some people are extremely optimistic. For example, the EU Convention thinks 860,000 jobs will be created. Until last year, WEF always said more jobs will be created than lost. However, in the Future of Jobs report 2023, for the first time, they thought these new advanced technologies will actually be job negative. So if they were creating 69 million jobs, 89 million jobs were being lost. Economist from MIT, David Autor, actually thinks most of the jobs will be lost in mid-management. So think about somebody who's middle-aged with family, working in a white-collar job, losing their job. And then what does this mean for mortgages? What does it mean for old age pension? What does it mean for Social Security? What does it mean for mental health? So there's a lot of things that we haven't addressed right now. And you just have to look at the layoffs that are currently happening, where people are onboarding technology at huge speeds, to realize it's not just a simple retraining issue. If you're middle-aged, I don't think you can retrain in 2 months or 3 months, nor will there be jobs easily available. So this is something we want to go and consider. And I'm going to borrow an example from online gaming. So Roblox is one of those popular games. It has 75 million people playing it on a daily basis. Now, what's interesting is 85% of most of these games, the economy is generated through microtransactions, right? And they have a lot of creators making money. So if you read the annual report, you saw that $5.6 billion was apportioned to their creators. But when you saw how many were paid, it was only 11,000. And this gives you an idea that the future might really be about a lot of micro jobs without job security, where the human being moves as a commodity to the bottom of the chain. And this is something we need to be worried, and we can build in those safeguards right now. Let's talk about children. UNICEF says that 1 out of 3 people playing on virtual reality is a child. Many of these children are very young, and like we just mentioned, Ricardo talked about, many of these are neuro sort of working in coordination with the brain. How do these impact the brain as they develop? There's very little research on that. My worry is also the advent of defense technology coming in. For example, in 2016, DARPA actually funded a game on Minecraft just to see how people would strategize. And we know, for example, one thing children have is creativity. We lose it as we become adults, but children are highly creative. So this again comes back to, how do we safeguard children from exploitation? If, for example, children are playing on a gamified device for long hours and making money for content providers, is this economic exploitation? Is this child labor? I'm not really sure. And then we briefly spoke about things like cyberbullying. A lot of studies are actually showing the offline and online world are merging. Very interesting study from Microsoft on civility actually shows when children are being harassed at home or in schools, this is most likely going to follow them into an online environment. And again, we're unprepared for this because of the scale at which it's going to happen right now. Very briefly on environment, the metaverse is a data monster, right? Mostly a lot of the files are visual and therefore heavy. And while it's easy not to put them on your hard drive, you might think putting it on the cloud is easy. But data centers today have a carbon footprint equivalent to the airline industry, or even much more at the rate at which we're going. More importantly, they consume something like 3 to 6 million gallons of water per day. That could easily supply 30,000 to 50,000 people. And if they're using renewable energy, these come from extractive industries. And that brings me to the next point. You cannot think of metaverse only from data. You've got to think of it as hardware. And e-waste today is the largest growing waste in the world. We generate something like 50 to 60 tons of e-waste, of which only 20% is recycled. 75% is sent to African and Asian countries. So at this point, there is no planet B. We have to worry about that. And I think what we do and we discuss today is critically important. Thank you, Irina.
Thank you, Melodina and Ricardo. And we heard some concerns and also some potential benefits related to human rights. I would like to now to move to Monique and Kumardev and have their thoughts related to opportunities and challenges related to the rule of law. Monique, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and to have this dialogue with the Council of Europe, of course, with my colleagues in IEEE, and what a frame up of discussions that we're having. I will also state that I was at the World Economic Forum, and there is actually an appetite to use the quote unquote metaverse for the next let's say next agora to think about how we interact. So let me frame it up. I'm going to talk about really an issue that I think is going to be very important for us as we think forward, and that is metaverse law. I think we need to think about, I'm going to talk about from an introduction to a general problem to a specific problem. As has already been stated, we already looked at the 21st century, the thinking of this rapidly expanding digital landscape, which is really witnessing a paradigm shift. And that is the rise of the metaverse itself. The metaverse, we know, had been coined from Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash, 1992. But it refers to a collective virtual shared where users can interact with computer-generated environment each in real time. So the think of it is the question to research, or the question that we need to talk about, is whether growing complexity and scale of the metaverse require a comprehensive set of guidelines in the form of a codex, in the form of some kind of law. If I commit a crime in the metaverse, is that prosecutable? I mean, if it could be so egregious, and you have to think about people being, and there are sets of examples being really terribly egregious in these worlds, if you will. You know, what does the behavior, interoperability, and safety within these virtual reality look like? So, you know, questions that we have to think and ponder is what elements should be a comprehensive metaverse codex? How can various stakeholders of the metaverse ecosystem, including users, developers, regulators, and policymakers, contribute to the development of a metaverse codex? What are the potential impacts of a metaverse codex on user experience, digital rights, and the growth trajectory of the metaverse? And why does a metaverse codex matter in the current digital landscape, and how can it help shape the future virtual worlds? The general problem statement, and then going to a specific problem statement that we all need to ponder in this dialogue is, you know, if we think about it as an emergent shared, the metaverse virtual space becoming a frontier for digital innovation, communication, interaction, there are immersive experiences and dynamic user engagement that poses questions of ethics and safety. The hypothesis that we need to ponder is that these challenges stem from the absence of a comprehensive and universally accepted set of guidelines, a codex to regulate and standardize behaviors, interactions, and practices within the metaverse. the concept of a metaverse codex, while pivotal for governing interactions and protecting user rights within the metaverse, remains largely undefined and unexplored. The intricacies of these formulating such a codex, its implementation across diverse platforms, enforcement mechanism, and its potential implications on the metaverse ecosystems are areas of considerable ambiguity. And I think overall, we have to think about the issues of looking at the discourse on digital ethics, online governance, and user safety. And finally, the specific problem statement for us to think about is, while the metaverse promises unprecedented opportunities for social interactions and entertainment and commerce, its complexity challenges safety, ethical behavior, and user rights protection. And despite the Metaverse's codex's potential to shape behaviors, protect user rights, and ensure interoperability in the realm, its conceptualization, composition, and enforcement mechanisms remain unclear. And this gap is really an understanding how this codex, again, what would metaverse law or codex could integrate into diverse platforms that comprise the metaverse and the potential roadblocks that could arise. And one gap is in the universal applicability and enforcement, if you will. Creating a metaverse codex that is universally applicable and enforceable across a diverse array of platforms, countries, and jurisdictions is a challenge. So each platform might have its unique governance structures, norms, rights, rules, while different countries may have varying regulations and legal systems regarding digital rights, privacy, safety, and cybercrime. Finally, understanding how to address these issues will be a crucial part of the study on the Metaverse Codex. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Monique mentioned law enforcement and justice. Kumardev, what are your thoughts around these topics and the Interpol perspective and approach to that?
I'm muted. You can hear me, I believe. Right. So first of all, I wanted to thank you, Rodika, Irina, and the Council of Europe for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I realize I'm the only one who's not a part of the partner organizations from the Council of Europe and the IEEE, and of course, Irene, amazing work that has been done together on this report. And it's a privilege to be among such colleagues. Secondly, I know you in the introduction mentioned my role in the advisory group for the Metaverse for the Interpol, but I think what is also probably relevant in this context is that I am the co-founder of the NEOM Metaverse. The NEOM Metaverse is still in operation, and I've left NEOM almost, I think, 2.5 years ago now. But I did co-found that as a multi-billion-dollar metaverse, and we face a lot of the issues that are being discussed here today. And of course, I'm a member of the World Economic Forum for the last 10+ years as an expert contributor in the expert network. So I've been involved in the discussions that we've been having there in the metaverse, particularly when there was an overlap between the WEF and NEOM on the topic. NEOM is part of the metaverse consortium at the WEF. So on the law enforcement side, I think it's very important to understand that there's two types of issues. One is what we would call regular crimes. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to trivialize crimes in general, but it's the type of crimes that we see happening today already being done in the metaverse context as well. So these are things like identity crime. These are things like stealing of digital assets that's going on, hacking into wallets and other assets that you might have. We anticipate in the Interpol that we are going to see an explosion of that on the metaverse, right? And the reason for that is complex, but to simplify for the context of for the fact of the matter that we have very little time here, essentially comes down to the fact that the metaverse is really going to be the Wild West of, if we can use that old analogy, the Wild West of immersive reality, in the sense that today immersive reality is fairly contained. You are within a program essentially that you're interacting with, and this program is provided by one company typically. So if you're doing the Meta, the Horizon world, or if you're in some other world. But the metaverse will truly be a decentralized global network of servers that together stitch an unending immersive reality. And in that space, you're going to have the fact that you will not even know where the criminals are or where the crime is being committed. to be able to pinpoint that, right? So that just opens the doors to multiple different levels of criminality that today we see to some extent. But we believe that there's also going to be a separate category of crime within the metaverse, which we have called in the Interpol, in the report that you might have seen from the Interpol on metaverse. It's called the Metaverse Law Enforcement Perspective. We talk about it as the meta crime, right? And the meta crime doesn't mean metadata about the crime or criminals. That is a part of the story. But it really means the fact that we think there's going to be a set of crimes that are specific to the metaverse and how it works. And the reason for that is, of course, very diverse. And if you look at the World Economic Forum report on that, they came up with a very nice chart, as the forum does, on potential harms in and through the metaverse. And they sort of touched upon the different areas, but we looked at it from a use case perspective in the Interpol. And apart from identity crime, we're going to see financial crime. We're going to see a lot of money laundering. We're going to see tax crime. We're obviously going to see property crime. We're not talking about property in the sense of physical property, but digital property. And related to that, we're going to see intellectual property crime. But what is perhaps most worrying or most concerning is that we anticipate that there will be a rise in crime in what we call people-to-people crime or person crime, especially sexual assault and crimes against children, and acts that cause emotional distress, and of course, to a certain degree, crimes against critical infrastructure. Of course, it's not in the same box, but we call that terrorism. I don't think it's the right word, but it was what was the most relevant one to use at the moment. So we feel that we've already seen some cases around that. There's been a recent case in the UK about sexual assault in the metaverse. There has been, in fact, a prosecution in South Korea, where a individual tried to use AI to create exploitation images of children, and said this is not real, so it's not a crime. But the Korean court said, no, this is a crime because the images are real enough. And we're going to see an explosion of that, right? But the critical challenge underlying and underpinning all of this is the fact that, as we were discussing in Interpol, when a crime like this happens, first of all, who is committing that? Where is this person or individual, or for that matter, a piece of code that's committing the crime? Where is that located? On what networks, or what networks has it used to actually give effect to the crime? And when the crime was being committed, or the people who were the victims, where were they located? So it becomes a jurisdictional nightmare. And I think Monique just was referring to that, is that we have no codexes for this. Absolutely none at the moment. So that is the real challenge, is the fact that in the metaverse, you can pretty much get away with a lot of things today simply because there is no matrix in place, no framework in place that can identify who should go after you, where, what, and how. Right. So that, I think, is really where that problem is, and it's not something to which anybody has a solution at the moment.
Thank you very much to both of you, and I think we all recognize some similar discussions that were taking place over 20 years ago with what was called the internet law, or after that, digital law. So let's see if Monique is right in the metaverse law, how we will be seeing that. So moving now to the democracy side of things, I'm looking at Irena, and I would like to know what do you think are the opportunities and challenges that the metaverse can pose in relation to democracy?
Well, a lot of... Is it working? Not on. Hello? Yes. Yes. A lot of what I'm going to say is probably fiction, or at least hypothesis, because democracy has not yet evolved into the metaverse, or if there is any democratic activity happening, or directly democracy-related activity happening in the metaverse, is probably more of a sidekick than a central. But let me try and speculate a little bit. Imagine I imagine that the metaverse can have a positive impact on the levels of political participation. We saw with the European Union elections and the latest national elections as well that the participation generally tends to be falling. I can imagine that if there are political rallies happening in the metaverse, that can make those rallies more appealing to people, especially young people that inhabit the metaverse, but that don't really connect with political parties or political activities. So they could come across or could be attracted to some political activities just simply because they're happening in a sort of virtual reality space. And at the same time, there are possibilities for political advertising that would be better adapted to the interests of the audiences and thus greatly amplified. We saw already this a little bit with AI and with the activities related to Cambridge Analytica, so that's not uncontroversial. Adapting political advertising to specific audiences has always happened. Even politicians, when they go to one voter and another don't necessarily say the same thing. But when this is automated, when this is data-driven and powered, then in a large scale, then it could also be really a source of manipulation, which could be worrying. We also have to be careful because if we are talking about the metaverse and avatars and digital entities, digital humans, first of all, we can come across situations where politicians are not even humans at some point. Or that they change their appearance or their way of behavior digitally so that they appeal to different voters. So, who are then, in the end, who are we electing? Who are our elected representatives? There will be probably issues around media because today in political, in democracy, we have rules that specify how can media and basically the information, the public debate give equal access to different political candidates and parties to the public space. Basically you try to be equitable in the way, especially during election campaigning, the different candidates are presented. In the metaverse, it will be very difficult. So far, I cannot imagine how we can enforce that or how indeed we can give access, journalists could have access to scrutinize and critically review all the political debate that's going on. Then there are issues around politics as spectacle, because the metaverse so far is very much a gaming environment. And if that identity of the metaverse remains, if it remains really game-based, then the idea of politics as spectacle as we see it now, it will be amplified, and it's a very different idea of politics than we had, in the classical sense. When you have politics as game, when you have stories appearing in a very 3D, in a very strong format, then people's emotions will be stirred in a very different way. So they will behave very differently than in what we call real life. Then I can imagine there could be specific online environments that are proprietary created and that could be exclusive, like imagine white-only environments or environments only for specific minority groups where others are not allowed, that will create more segregation that we are trying to eradicate in the real world that could recreate itself in a metaverse. And so there will be more divides and more polarization. And finally, if power on metaverse is concentrated as it is now, it continues to be concentrated in the hands of the owners of the metaverse applications or whatever sites, places, then if we continue seeing what we see now with social media, where these owners enforce their own rules of behavior and their own ethical and other codexes, then we will have also for democratic activities de facto censorship and limitations to freedom of expression that are clearly not in line with the national and European standards for democracy. So these are just some ideas that we might want to think about.
May I ask a question in the meantime, or do you want to have a whole full array and we just make patiently and
Why not?
10,000 this
Please.
Thank you so much. My name is Jacques Begelinger. I'm co-chair of the Swiss IGF, but I'm also a lecturer at the Dutch University. And in this context, I was just supervising a master thesis on generative AI, and what you were just pointing out, very rightly so and very concisely, was more or less the same. That was brought in the context of generative AI. So how would we have the question of generative AI, the discussion, and metaverse merged? So in our case, it looked as if it was just generative AI plus platform problems makes metaverse.
I'm happy to take that if
There is also
Somebody wants, yeah.
Kumar and I think,
Yeah.
please Kumar and I think Clara can also.
So first of all, very good question. And let me address that from two aspects. One from a metaverse creation aspect, which is the NEOM side, and the other from the law enforcement aspect, the Interpol side. So from the metaverse creation aspect, Gen AI is like a magic wand, right? It essentially frees up metaverse creators from almost 40 to 50% of what they would have to otherwise do. So if you look at what Jen Huang said, the head of NVIDIA, he was perfectly right. He's been right for a long time. He's very right. He said in about 4 or 5 years from now, most game creators will only focus on gameplay. The game context, environment, landscape, and NPCs, non-playing characters, will be auto-generated, right? You'll just say, I want to have a environment that's in the desert, for example, and has high rises, and create that. We'll use that. Neom will use that too, right? So on the metaverse creation side, Gen AI will be very useful. Now, unfortunately, it will also be equally useful for crime because you will be able to take data, whether you get that legally or illegally, and most probably you'll get it illegally, and create an absolute clone of a actual identity. So you'll be able to take some of their data, like date of birth, how they look, the color of their eyes, the hair, the golden ratio, the distance between the eyes, nose, and mouth, which is how we do facial recognition, essentially. Things like that. And you will be able to create an absolute clone of that very easily without that other person knowing, and then be able to impersonate them and take over their own accounts and things like that. So it's an absolute nightmare in terms of how this will pan out. And if you think about Gen AI in the context of things like legal texts or your signature, imagine a software or an avatar that can actually read your signature somewhere and then recreate that and generate contracts on your behalf, right? So, and then go on to a platform and say, I'm going to buy these NFTs, and then suddenly drain your wallet and ensure that, you will not even know that these things are happening. Just the fact that you were on a metaverse platform and you shared some data, which was then hacked into, and your details were then available to the the actors who wanted to then use them wrongly, would be enough, right? So Gen AI is a double-edged sword when it comes to the metaverse. On one side, it'll have a lot of economic and potential benefits for creators and publishers, but the other side, it will absolutely make the law enforcement and the crime scenario much more complex than it is today.
Yeah, so I would just like to add to that, actually one of the parallels that you see is also that you have also a competition problem, that you have only just very few providers of foundational models. And now we see it also with the implementation of the AI Act. A lot of people are asking, so how can we even comply? Because we have these few providers and we're using the foundational models that were not built according to the principles of the AI Act. And I think that that is very important that we take these things into account right from the beginning. Now we are thinking in Europe of how to create our own foundational model and so on. Maybe it's a little bit too late, but still we can try. What is also important is that that we need to be part of this discussion. So when it comes to the creation of foundational of the metaverse, we need to actually involve civil society. You need to be co-designing these spaces from the beginning, because later on, if everything is already there, it's very difficult to come back to that. What we also see, for instance, how important regulation is, because I think I read it only today, that Meta AI is not able, well, will not launch in Europe because of concerns of the foundational model being built on data which is not conforming to the GDPR. So I think that for certain things, that's absolutely important that we have those guardrails and they are taken into account from the beginning.
But maybe just one thing, and it's a little bit a continuation of what you were saying. As I was saying earlier, there is, of course, the EU AI Act and the Council of Europe, which is a global instrument, potentially global instrument, the AI Framework Convention. I think the question is whether these also will be enough as framework rules to apply to the metaverse. And we are not sure yet, because obviously AI is the heart of the metaverse, everybody was saying, but there's more to the metaverse than AI. There's also, communities, there are people, behaviors. It's also the people inside the metaverse that matter a lot. It's not just the technology.
This is indeed a matter that is being addressed by, in the report by the experts, like how should we address it? Should it be technology-specific, principle-based, policy and regulation around it? So definitely a very relevant topic. And one last point I would like, in relation to the first question that we were covering, is we're discussing about, in both cases of the metaverse and one of the enablers, Gen AI, for example, we are navigating in a constantly changing space of technology and development, and we're trying to identify what are potential implications, impacts, short-term, mid-term, long-term. How can we navigate in such a space? And I'm turning to Nondas, who is a professional in this space.
Thank you. Let me give a quite different perspective on our discussion today. And I like that Irena said a lot of times the word imagine, and imagine if this happened, imagine if this happened. The easy answer is we don't really know what is going to happen. I mean, we are talking about the metaverse, we are talking about AI, but nobody practically knows how these things will evolve, what kind of technologies we're going to use, what kind of lenses we're going to use. Maybe we're not going to use any lenses. Nobody knows. And the thing with the metaverse is that it belongs to a group of technologies that we call them general purpose technologies. And this is like the steam engine or electricity, as you said before, the internet. This is a group of technologies that have a huge transformative power. They change everything. They create new economic sectors. They create new businesses. They change the job market. And the thing is, what we are going to experience today is we are not going to experience one general purpose technology, but we are expecting a wave of this kind of technologies which are on different maturity level at the moment. So we are talking about the metaverse, we have AI, we have quantum computing, we have synthetic biology, we have brain-to-computer interface. It's a group of technologies that they are maturing on different speed, but they are all together changing the world as we know it. And in this kind of uncertainty, we need to try to imagine as radically as we can different kind of futures. We don't. It's not safe to imagine one future. It's not safe to make a linear projection. And it's really nice because I read the first draft, the first release of your report. I'm really happy that this report is full of this kind of what-if questions. It draws light in a huge list of uncertainties. What is going to be the impact on health? What is going to be the impact of democracy? What is going to be? So it's more asking questions. It's more talking about a level of uncertainties. And I think this is the value of this report. And I agree with you that regulations alone are not enough, but I guess in the second round we are going to talk about how to govern, so I'm not going to talk about this. I will just close my first intervention saying that the International Convention for the Biological Weapons, a very important thing for how we govern biological weapons and what is happening in the humanity, has an annual budget of around 2 million euros and 4 people as a personnel, which is maybe the budget of a post tavern in the center of Vilnius. So we can imagine how many resources we have to invest in order to be able to build a framework for governing or for regulating or for controlling this kind of complex system of technologies that is coming in the future.
Thank you very much. So we heard the series of issues, concerns, potentials also of the metaverse. And what has been identified in the report indeed is the fact that a lot of concerns, a lot of terminology that we have been hearing from social platforms, the internet, the gaming environments and other topics, they are being repeated. Nevertheless, they seem to, the risks related to them seem to be exacerbated, linked to what Ricardo was mentioning before about the constant collection, processing, and unprecedented type of data collection and analysis, and that certain notions like what does identity mean, what does privacy mean, what does, for example, our private space mean, or reality or agency. All these notions may mean something different in the metaverse context. So in that sense, there is a lot of considerations in the report around the need to look closer into short, mid, and long-term impact of the metaverse across different topics and areas, and more in-depth analysis. Now, we heard the word governance, and we are at the right forum here to talk about the governance and responsible development of and deployment of the metaverse. So how can we actually do that? On one side, reaping the benefits and the potential that the metaverse brings also for the exercise of human rights, the rule of law and democracy on one side, but also mitigating the risks and concerns that we heard about. The Council of Europe, for example, is very rich in solid legal frameworks, standards, and case law. And we have seen in the report some experts have been thinking that we just need to interpret the existing frameworks. Some consider we need something new. Where would you see, I will start by Irena, would you see the application of existing regulations and case law sufficient, or would it be something, the question mark for the future, or a need for new frameworks? So what have you been hearing at the Council of Europe, and what could one learn for the future moving forward? So I will start by Irena, and I will ask then Ricardo to share his thoughts.
Well, first of all, one thing is for sure, at the Council of Europe, we don't take regulation lightly, and we don't want to immediately rush into new regulation for various reasons. First of all, there is plenty of regulation already. There are a lot of rules that will apply theoretically to the metaverse as well. The important thing is that they be actually extrapolated into national laws and then applied, that the national institutions, from law enforcement to judiciary, to the prosecutors, to the users as well, educators, everybody are actually aware of the rules, and they're able to, well, to make sure that these rules are followed in each of them in their own ways. So first of all, we privilege actions on our side that will help enforcing and applying the existing rules. And that includes, of course, awareness raising. We provide legal advice to our member states. We work with different stakeholders, practitioners also, to help them raise also their capacity to apply their knowledge and to work in different environments. We also work with police officers, with judiciary, create networks of prosecutors that deal with different topics and learn how to prosecute also across the board, because one of the big issues, of course, is that these are global phenomena. And the data is moving globally, and the residency of the different stakeholders can vary, so it's really difficult. At the same time, we are obviously open to considering new regulation whenever that will be necessary. Let's see to what extent the take-up of the new AI convention will be there, and to what extent it will serve for the purposes of the metaverse as well. So we need some time to see whatever already exists, already works. But we are not against new regulation for the metaverse. It's just very early days. So I say, let's see the national enforcement and then learn and continue to be watchful and see where we go next.
Great. Ricardo, thoughts around the possibility of new rights or sufficiency of existing frameworks?
Yes, thanks, Irene. So in the last years or decade, we have seen similar discussions in other fields, from AI, but also neurotechnologies, where these technologies that we can use to measure and interpret brain activity. And this similar question appeared: are the current regulations, the current frameworks, still valid and applicable? And in the case of neurotechnologies, that even trigger certain calls for definition of new human rights, the so-called neuro rights, implementation that are, say, coming from the implementation of these techniques. I think that before jumping into the question, is new regulation, new human rights required, we need to really assess what the impact is and to what extent the current definitions encompass the newly identified impacts, both the beneficials and the negative impact that these technologies have. Otherwise, we may fall into an explosion of not only in governance mechanisms, but even we can imagine an explosion of new human rights. And I'm not sure if that's the most effective way to manage and mitigate the risks that these technologies imply. As it was mentioned before, a key aspect right now is to identify what are the existing mechanisms that will apply into these techniques. We have said it before, these technologies, such as the metaverse, will be supported by other technologies. Some of them are established, some of them are emerging. So we first need to know what are those regulations and governance mechanisms that apply. We should avoid gray zones, both from the user's perspective, but also from the developer's perspective. And once gaps have been identified, we can really say these are the areas where we need to establish new forms of governance. And these governance mechanisms, they come in different manners. Can be binding law, it can be regulation, self-regulation, or other type of innovative ways for regulating technology. And I think this is another aspect in which we need to challenge ourselves on how to build new ways that are still effective, but also agile to govern these technologies. Not too early, because we don't know enough about them, but not too late when the risks are no longer manageable.
Thank you, Ricardo. And before moving into the field of more soft law and self-regulation, we have a question which is addressed to Irena. The question is, Kumardev mentioned the rise of sexual assault in the metaverse. What is the Council of Europe's opinion on the application of the Istanbul Convention and General Recommendation number 1 in these cases? Do they sufficiently protect women from sexual assault in the metaverse?
Thank you very much for this question. The general principle from the Council of Europe point of view is whatever is illegal in real life is also illegal online. I mean, there is certainly no doubt about it. Obviously, rape happens in the metaverse. Unfortunately, sexual violence of all kinds, including against children, is happening in the metaverse as well. But there again, the problem is again jurisdictions of the perpetrator, of the victim, gathering of evidence. And here I would like to flag, I'll flag it tomorrow as well in my keynote speech, but the second, I believe it's the second protocol of the Budapest Convention about transnational gathering of evidence. This has not been ratified sufficiently yet, so I really appeal for this. It's really necessary. And also, you know, having cyber cops, having the law enforcement and the investigators capable and skilled enough to work online, to gather evidence there, these are the real challenges. So it's not about the law. The law applies. It's like, you know, what do we do after that? The law in itself is not going to protect us. It's people, it's institutions, it's policies.
Thank you, Elena. And now moving from regulation to other types of governance, I would like to ask Monique to share some thoughts on self-regulation coming from companies. So we have seen, for example, in the field of AI, that in some cases we have corporate principles and values that apply, and some companies consider that this is sufficient as a means of governance or self-governance. In other cases, we have codes of conducts that the users need to agree upon so that they can participate in platforms. Monique, would you like to comment on that type of regulation?
Sure. And I think, this is a great discussion because we're going to have also the intersectionality with standards and law overall. But in the private sector, you have the dialectic between, gaining revenue. That's the situation right now. There's this revenue, and also looking at what safety, what safety looks like. Basically, what I see and what I've observed is that self-regulation is not really working. I think you need what companies need is really kind of a codex, or really looking at. Some of them have basically said, well, we need guardrails. You have to tell us what to do, right? And that may be the role of standards. That may be the role of other aspects to be discussed. When you have self-regulation, you do see that dialectic occurring. I also argue that if it's so important within companies, is it at the CEO level? That's another issue to look at. When you think about not just the OpenAI discussion, et cetera, when it's at the CEO level, and there are reports going to the CEO on, regulatory aspects, or looking at where from a development perspective, from a solutions perspective, what the red lines are, to say that these particular technologies have been developed for these particular use cases. Anything about, you can't obviously have a long list of cases around potential harms, but at least be very declarative in terms of what you've developed these technologies for. Then I think that's really, really important. Otherwise, if it's buried down into an organization structure, it's not important. It really isn't. I do understand too, from the Council of Europe, you don't want to overregulate. You have to be very, very careful. But I think from a company perspective, from private sector, the answer from my perspective is you need to provide some guardrails. You need to provide some examples of maybe this is where the standards are to be applied, because that's what they're saying, regulate us, basically. But I think we have to be careful of what that really, really means. And also look into companies where the reporting lines is for these types of technologies. It can't be just punted to a sector of government affairs. It really, really has to be at the CEO level. Thank you.
And we have another question.
Thank you very much. Dennis Redeker, Zemke, University of Bremen. I think this is a fantastic discussion. I very much look forward to reading the report. I haven't read the report, so in case I say something, I'll take one. In case I say something that is included already, please forgive that. Now, I particularly followed the demands by Monique Morrow, who asked for this codex, and I'm kind of wondering where this is supposed to come from, right? Because we worked on this for social media for such a long time. Well, we would hope to have a codex of some sort. Simply, we haven't been able to come together. And the reasons are obvious. We have different norms in different countries. We have different norms across companies. I think to some extent we should push companies more who develop these services, who develop particular social XR services at the moment, because they aren't doing anything. So, well, not anything, but they hardly do very much. If we look, for example, at Meta, we see that for their Instagram and Facebook, they have an oversight board. The oversight board, as far as I know, is not taking cases from the Metaverse. So it's even its own institutions are not geared, are not taking on this new technology. it's under-regulated even within the private frameworks of these corporations. So on the one hand, yes, maybe we should strive for something that's a codex, but at the same time, we need to develop something, and or these companies need to develop some ways in privately governing the metaverse in the fact that we don't or never actually get to that global codex that we might wish for. So my question is like, how do you think? I mean, should we wait for the codex, or who's going to write the codex, or what can other stakeholders do in the meantime?
Well, this is a wonderful question. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, actually, I think I'm in the process of doing a PhD in cyber psychology, so that is an area that I would be looking at in terms of the body of research to go down that line. I think it is yet to be, I would say yet to be defined, but it is something that we have to think about as a bigger space to look forward to think very big on what a codex could possibly look like. The other issue around companies, I've worked in private sector, so I know how that works, right? And in essence, they're very revenue oriented, and so if it's not in there at the CEO level, because they have this short term, and that is the reality. They're encumbered to their shareholders, and I distinguish between shareholders and stakeholders, but they are looking at, to be fair to them, at potentials for standards in this space as they're developing these technologies and solutions. So I think that's really important. That's important for standards too. I know that we have colleagues here who could talk about standards, but that's also the important for standards. But I will argue it has to be at the CEO level. If it's not at the CEO level, then it's really buried down into an organization or private sector.
So before we move to the next comment, let us give the opportunity to two panelists who want to respond to the previous point.
Well, I don't want to venture an opinion. I just want to add some relevant, I think, piece of information. From my perspective, I had the privilege to represent business at the Council of Europe on data protection 101. So, and I can tell you just out of my experience, which is, I think is relevant, there is not a company. A company is, as a country or whatever organism, has there several levels. And one needs to know that it may come together, everything at the CEO level. But there is compliance, there is legal, there is ethical, there is public relations, then there is marketing, and there is product development. And they are internally fighting each other as well. And this needs to be taken into account whenever going after companies. One needs to know whom within the company. And I think it's then too easy to just say it needs to be the CEO. Won't work.
No, I agree. So if I may counter, I do agree that it's not just the CEO. It can go to the board if you wanted to be that direct, but it's going to be, and it's multimodal, right? You have all of that. It's multimodal, but when there is let me just say this: when something happens and the brand is tainted, it is at the CEO level. So let's not forget that as a topic. Thank you.
In interviews we had with companies, we heard also about the challenges they have with dealing with different markets and jurisdictions and compliance, which in some cases mean following the strictest regulation, some other having different offerings as per jurisdiction. We have Ricardo and Melodina patiently waiting. Thank you, Ricardo, and then Melodina.
Yes, just briefly, because I think this is at the crux of the challenge and how to address the challenge. I think such codex is indeed necessary. What we also need to think about is what this codex can actually be. And in my opinion, it's not a single document per se that can encompass all the different aspects that need to be taken into account, but it's rather a combination of multiple types of instruments, where we can have high-level soft law instruments that can provide the general guidelines, that can provide global consistency about the principles that need to be protected and fostered, and these further on supported, and Monique mentioned that earlier on, with technical standards that go into more specifics of how this can be actually deployed. And I can take analogy of processes, as I mentioned before, from AI, where we first had certain ethical guidelines, and that were later supported by technical standards and socio-technical standards, for instance, the P7000 at the level of IEEE and others. We are seeing that as well at the level of new technologies, where Council of Europe, but also OECD, first provided these high-level recommendations, and now we see start the development of these socio-technical standards, so that the different stakeholders and also the different levels of a given organization can find appropriate guidance to their specific roles and their specific duties in a way that is consistent what they need to do. Because it's not enough to provide a technical standards to the engineering department or division of a company if, as it was mentioned before, the procurement, the HR, the marketing, and the CEO, they don't have the appropriate guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, and we will be hearing more about the standard side of things, that side of soft law, right after Melodina comments.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that, one, the metaverse is a co-created space, which means you can't control it very easily only from one side. You need both sides to actually work on it. Secondly, the metaverse doesn't have a scarcity of space, so it is boundless. And this makes monitoring it very hard. In the past, when I went and looked at online gaming, and I looked at it over 30 years, when they tried to use AI bots, it did not work. Because again, you need to control that or retrain them. So we come back to how much human capability you've built in. And like we've just seen right now, a lot of the content moderators, for example, suffer from exhaustion. They're paid very little, they drop out. So unless we start looking at how we're building the metaverse differently with a more human-centric nature, it's going to be a problem. And we've got to be values-based. And again, this is difficult when you have different geographies. You have young people who go to the metaverse to escape for fantasy, and they don't want rules. So we've got to get everyone on the same page. And I think this is where the challenge is. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, the IEEE Standards Association could not talk about standards. And let us talk about what is the role of standards, Clara, in the discussion, in the governance.
Thank you. Well, I think that Ricardo already mentioned that actually you have with standards these two dimensions. One is it can be bottom up, that it actually self-regulation, so an industry needs to agree on something. Like for instance, even now with self-driving cars, what is the right, what is the acceptable amount of, let's say, even accidents, when it comes to self-driving cars. So it's a kind of interoperability, of course, is another, communication and so on. So the technical part of standardization was always there. What we are seeing now is this socio-technical part, which is about how you actually take the values of the stakeholders into account when you design and deploy these systems. And indeed, it's about actually creating a shared understanding, sometimes even of what we are talking about. Or if we're talking about even of AI, there was a big discussion, what does AI mean? Now we have the same discussion of what does Metaverse mean? And you can see that you have a technical specification which has legal implications, because now when it comes to the AI Act, you actually have to know, is this according to this definition, am I under the regulation or not? So here again, standards and can play an important role. We also see with the AI Act that it is actually, and not only the AI Act, the Data Act, and so on, the Cyber Act is also based on standards. And this is because you have a mismatch in development as well. So and you don't want to put too much technical technical issues or technical definition into the regulation, because then you are not keeping up with the pace of technology. So you want to keep it on a high level, and the technical standards are the ones that are basically providing the more specificity, which actually talks to the different stakeholders. What I would also like to mention, I'm also the co-chair of the OECD expert group on AI and privacy. And the interesting point is to actually bring together the two communities. And what I saw is that even for things that everybody agrees, like transparency and fairness, means completely different things to the two communities. So even, let's say, these non-technical terms need to be defined so that it is meaningful and it actually is implementable.
And language, the harmonization on language and definition is also one of the traditional uses of technical standards. So that could also be interesting. So we are moving in a space. Governance will also be interesting also to view from a different point, as we are shifting from the traditional online environments and content and agent management. Now we are going to look into behavior management and space management and access issues in all these proprietary spaces. So governance will also have to take into account these aspects. Another issue that we have looked into is also co-regulation as a way of joining forces, the industry and the public sector and the official formal regulation. While there are also discussions around anticipatory policy making and regulation. So we're trying to regulate as the technology develops with related to the challenges we heard before. What are some tools that would be available for policymakers, or some methodologies which could help in this process, which is quite challenging?
Thank you, and I will try to be extremely fast because I know time is running. And when we talk about anticipatory governance, we are talking about a government that has a different culture, a culture that is more focused on what we say in the discipline of foresight, a culture that they are eager to experiment with new policies or new approaches, a culture that allow them to identify emerging challenges, emerging weak signals of change. Also will allow them to identify the system, so they have this kind of system thinking that is required. And I will say again, to experiment and also have new approaches. We have discussed again and again that regulation alone is not enough. We have discussed again and again that standards alone are not enough. So what we need is a framework. We need different approaches, and we all know how much time it needs to have a regulation, or how much time we need to have standards. And it's really funny because, especially I was for 2 years the chief futurist on the prime minister in Greece, and it's easy how every time we have a new technology or a new challenge, the easy answer for every government in order to exhibit that they are very proactive and that they have the power to safeguard what is happening is we will regulate. So everybody is discussing in Greece as well, also in other countries on national level for regulations. And it's really ridiculous because we cannot regulate this kind of technologies on a national level. So very quickly, we need this kind of regulatory frameworks on a global level, and takes time, even for things like climate change that we know what is going to happen. Still, we cannot find a common path to agree. We need global cooperation and standards, definitely. And we have seen before how standards can really offer a way to deal with things. We need definitely public participation. This is not enough. TED Talks, publications, talks like this is not enough. We need to actively engage with the society and the public. We need new ethical standards also on a company level, and we need also to find how we can experiment with models that combine profit and social purpose, and we need this also on the private sector. And we need to experiment again. We need to experiment with policies. We need to find regulatory sandboxes so that we can test this kind of new technologies. And yeah, I think that's for the time.
Thank you. So considering our starting 5 minutes later, are there, I will give us 5 more minutes. Would you have any additional questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, or any remarks you would like to make? And if not, yes, please.
Very short question. Even do I need a microphone for?
Yeah, for the maybe also for the online.
Very practical question. Is there a follow-up foreseen in some after a defined period, as sometimes with these reports is foreseen, or is it a one-off?
Yes, yes, of course. Well, the Council of Europe, and with, of course, with IEEE, whom I really would like to take the opportunity to thank very warmly for all the work and the expertise that you provided to this. The Council of Europe will continue. It stays on the file. We have our Committee on Media and Information Society, you're familiar, are going to write a report. My colleague, Rodica Ciocchina, who was already mentioned, is working on a report on to what extent existing regulation actually applies in the metaverse, and if there are any gaps and further requirements. However, I'd like also to bring in, and it was already mentioned, you know, human-centric metaverse, the participatory approach. I really think we should not only think regulation versus self-regulation. There are many other things. I mean, there are corporate social responsibility, there is social investment that states in particular can stimulate. The states can also drive innovation through specific funds or through other means that prioritize accessibility, transparency, accountability. And finally, the users. In the end of the day, our societies are law-abiding, generally speaking, not because there is only courts and police, etc., but also people. The people have ethical rules and they follow them, they're socialized in that way, and they self-regulate as well, you know, among the users. The reason, I mean, for instance, with hate speech, we have found that the best way to address hate speech is to have the other users in the community to actually shame or overwhelm with positive messages, counter narratives. It's the same for the metaverse. Unless you have people, unless you have a demos in the metaverse that actually is ready to enforce all the ethical standards, it's not going to work. And then in the end of the day, it's about education, it's about socialization.
And maybe to conclude, would you like Clara also to mention, you know, what is planned from our side?
Sure. I think that skills, what you just mentioned, is really one of the important things, and I think it's bi-directional. You actually have to now, only when we're coming over to the development of these new spaces, we need to have more of these social, legal skills on the technical level, so that it's being taken into account from the beginning. And on the other hand, you know, all of us needs to know more about the technical, well, the things that can happen, let's say, so that we need to take into account. What we also see is now that fundamental rights is increasingly important for technology. We have in the AI Act a fundamental right impact assessment, just one of the examples. So we actually, as technologists, we need to learn as well how to deal with these kind of things, and I hope that we can collaborate on this in the future as well. The other big discussion is really on the environment, that we also heard how to take environmental issues into account and how to measure, how to monitor these things as we're moving now from AI, which is already taking so much resources that Melodina mentioned, to the metaverse, which is even a much more important issue. So looking forward to the collaboration as well.
One last point is that some sectors, so the report has been reviewed by several divisions within the Council of Europe, and some of the divisions expressed interest, and as this is cross-cutting and is dealing with different issues, different divisions expressed interest to follow up the work and focus on their respective area of focus. I would like to thank all of you for being here today and for your interest in the topic. And it would be an omission not to thank the people who made this report possible, namely the experts and contributors to the report, and all the good colleagues at the Council of Europe and IEEE who supported this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just to mention that the report will be available on the IEEE. There is the IEEE presence at the EuroDIG and also on the Council of Europe website, the full report. But we invite you to take some hard copies. Thank you very much.